We're a large, complex organization, and the organizations we collaborate with, they're large and complex as well. You really need to understand who you're talking to in those large organizations. So what is their role? What is their responsibility? How closely they sit on resources? If you end up misaligning and talking to the wrong people who may be promising something that they can't potentially deliver on, that's where it can go wrong.
Hello, and welcome to the Partnerships podcast series by UIIN. I'm Sarah Jabber, Director at UIIN, and your host for today. In this episode, Richard Cowburn, Head of Strategic Collaborations at Karolinska Institutet, joins us to explore how one of the world's top medical universities navigates partnerships across pharma, medtech, and public health. From building long-term alliances with companies like AstraZeneca and Johnson Johnson, to supporting researchers through decentralized systems, Richard offers a behind-the-scenes look at how Karolinska balances academic values with industry demands. I'm really pleased today to be joined by Richard Cowburn, who leads strategic collaborations at Karolinska Institutet, which is one of the world's foremost medical universities. At Karolinska, Richard heads the External Engagement Office, which plays a central role in shaping partnerships across life sciences, from pharma and medtech to startups and government. With a background in research management and innovation ecosystems, Richard oversees how Karolinska structures, negotiates, and sustains long-term collaborations with all kinds of medical and pharma companies. We're going to go a bit deeper into that. Richard, when I sent him an overview of some of the themes I wanted to touch on today, jokingly said, we only have 30 minutes. We do only have 30 minutes, but I think a lot to get through, and I'm really pleased to have you with us today, Richard.
So yeah, thank you, Sarah. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for taking the time and helping us get to know you guys as an organization. I think it's nice to take this opportunity both to share how we work in this space, but I think it's also a nice time to reflect on how we do it at our end. We do it the way we've done it, and it's always good to learn from others as to how we do it. And also thank you for the very flattering photograph you put in the flyer. That was taken years ago after a couple of beers. But anyway, so I hope nobody that's joining now is disappointed and they're expecting somebody much younger in this.
The photo is why they've all joined.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, maybe. That was just a disclaimer.
Good thing then the podcast will just be an audio recording.
Okay, that's good.
Richard, when we were thinking about this conversation, and from what we know about Karolinska, you do have this what we tend to call like a front door model to make engagement easier, to make the institution easier to navigate. Maybe you can tell us a bit just to get started. Before we went live, we were talking about how Karolinska is quite unique in that it's a single faculty medical university, and you have this external engagement office. How does this front door approach work for you? What does it look like in practice? Maybe you can.
Firstly, this front door, if you like, our unit has been in existence for about 5 years, but that doesn't mean that we haven't worked with supporting industry collaboration before that, but we just created a formal unit and a formal structure around that. One thing that we had to consider is that Karolinska Institute researchers, they collaborate across the board with industry and other sectors. And there's a lot of experience and a lot of activity out there in the organization. And there's an organization we're very decentralized. So when we thought about setting up this function, we didn't really want to claim ownership and steer what was already working. I mean, there would be no point in doing that. But what we wanted to do was build a function that could create best practice and build on the best practice that we were generating, but also that we could pick up from other parts of the organization. So that's where we came in terms of creating value to the organization rather than putting a blanket over everything and saying you've got to do it this way, because the way we collaborate is, like I said, very decentralized, and there's different formats and different ways of collaborating depending on where you look in the organization. Everything from single projects to large consortia to, so there's a variety in collaboration formats, if you like. I think the advantage of creating a point of contact, is it makes it easier for people to engage with us. We can advertise that we exist, we can advertise the support that we provide and create that understanding. But not everything comes through us. In fact, we don't actually know how much comes through us and how much comes through the rest of the organization. But some kind of ambition to create best practice and use that to increase the quality and relevance of what we do in collaboration with external partners is really our ambition, reason for existence.
So to build on that, is the aim then, because you said in terms of best practice, to make sure that where there are potentially larger opportunities or more strategic partnerships, that you have that coordination as an organization?
Yeah, so we've set up a number of long-term partnerships, which are KI overarching. So they involve many different research areas, many different research groups across the university. The longest we've had that we set up in my team was actually before we existed as a unit, was with Johnson. That's been in existence for 10 years. We have a partnership with MSD, which has been in existence for 9 years now. We're going to celebrate 10 next year. The most long-term partnership that we've had is with AstraZeneca here in Sweden for many reasons: geography, locality, closeness, but also a long-term relationship. That partnership's very interesting because it's been in existence for so many years. It's evolved into different forms and different ways of collaborating with a lot of very different learnings there and different areas for collaboration. So those partnerships have given us, if you like, a lot of experience as to how to set up, how to govern, how to manage, and how to create value in that space. I think that one of the nice things about them is that they're so mature that we can now look at them and say, what have we actually generated in form of societal impact or benefit for patients when we're thinking about understanding human disease and thinking about how we create value over and beyond scientific publications. How do we change clinical practice? How do we change policy? How do we change guidelines? How do we support the approval and use of diagnostics and treatments for human disease conditions? And working in that space with our industry partners, I think has been really cool, actually.
Do you maybe to go into that a little bit more? When you talked about these measures of success or impact beyond publications or potentially income that's coming out, do you have an approach for how you track or measure that at the moment, maybe through the External Engagement Office?
That's something that's high on our to-do list, I would say. But this is something that everybody struggles with or is thinking about. How do you actually measure and follow up on what you're generating in partnerships with external actors? We can follow the money, we can follow the number of contracts, but that's just a numbers game. What we're talking about is true societal impact. And there we've been very inspired by what they've done in the UK with the REF but linked to research funding, but also, linked to research collaborations in all their shapes and forms, and a large focus on storytelling, actually. A lot, and that's been really worthwhile and also actually quite fun. Because we've had projects that are so mature that we can go back to the project teams and interview people from both ends, both from our industry partners and from KI, and say, what does this mean to you? How does it enrich your research as an academic? How has this created something of value for the industry partner? And create a narrative and a story around that. And then get those stories out there, so that people actually understand the true value of collaborating with industry in the form of something that is impactful and meaningful. And I think one of the nice things about doing it in dialogue and doing it in dialogue within the team is it becomes personal. It becomes personal for the people that have contributed to that, and it's meaningful for them as a team, and it's meaningful for those for whom we are trying to create some kind of value.
That's really powerful. The storytelling, as you said, drawing on personal experiences, but also what are we actually achieving and how is this changing the world? And I think especially in your context, working we talked about global health, and you probably maybe sometimes you might see the impact quickly, but oftentimes it's long-term horizon before you really can trace back and say, through this collaboration, we have achieved these outcomes and how it actually came to be.
It's actually in some ways, it's actually quite humbling at the end of the day, because what we've also done, I think one of the good things that we've done here at Karolinska Institutet is created a long-term strategy for how we work as a university, how we deliver according to SDGs, and how we deliver in our partnerships according to the SDGs. And then it becomes meaningful, because for me, a few years ago, when we started thinking about SDGs and how we deliver to us, it can be very abstract. But if you break it down into something concrete and something meaningful, then it becomes real, like you said.
Can we talk a bit around, you mentioned some of your partnerships that have been around for multiple years, and you said as well how being able to reflect on those has given you a lot of insights into how to manage, how to govern, but also what makes them successful. I'm curious to understand from your perspective, what have you seen? What has made these partnerships last so long? What's made them effective, impactful, and what role, I guess, has maybe supporting and managing that played?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one thing worth saying at first up is that we're talking about partnerships in the life science health space. We're talking mostly about partnerships with pharma, biotech, medtech industries. To create a long-term partnership in that space is actually quite difficult because we're dealing with companies that are often changing their strategies. They're often reprioritizing. They're often looking at other things. So how do you manage that and how do you work in that space and create something that has lasted for 10 years requires an awful lot of work. And I think it requires an awful lot of flexibility because you're always, I think, reappraising the partnership and saying, okay, this particular area, which we thought was prioritized, is suddenly off the radar. Then how do we bring in something? So I think one of the things about creating success is building a plethora of different opportunities. So building programs rather than building on single projects, if you like.
Yeah.
And then you need to manage the risk and you need to be able to, you understand, okay, this one's going to fly and maybe it'll just deliver after 3 or 4 years and then fade out. So where are the backups and where do we bring in new projects? But creating a diversity and creating a program of projects and opportunities is one measure of success. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to building trust between organizations and understanding each other and being able to take actually quite hard decisions because some decisions will come out of the blue and they may be quite difficult to deal with. But if you can work through those and say, okay, this is something that we're particularly happy with at the moment, but we understand it, we understand why that reprioritization, that strategy uptake and how that has impacted maybe negatively a partnership. But you can absorb that and you can work through it and say, well, actually, this is part of the risk. This is part of the way one has to work with industry. And if you can absorb that and build on that and then go on and say, it's not going to actually negatively impact the whole partnership in the long term. But yeah, there may be just a bump in the road in the short term, but now you can work through that. But that requires a lot of openness, a lot of transparency and a lot of trust between organizations and say, these things happen. Yeah. But let's work through it and let's not dwell on it and get upset on it and decide we're never going to work together again. It's like any relationship. You've got to work through these things and live with the ups and the downs, if you like. Yeah.
No, and when you talk about these partnerships, it's not overnight that you develop that level of trust. It takes time, you build it up, and I guess once you have that strong foundation, then you can deal with those bumps in the road as you put.
Yeah.
And that importance, no matter where I've had these conversations, which country, which type of institution, it does often come down to that, the trust, but also this ability to reevaluate priorities and be able to maybe shift the activities that you're doing or the way that you're collaborating to align with those.
And I think we're a large, complex organization, and the people we collaborate with, the organizations we collaborate with, they're large and complex as well. And you really need to understand who you're talking to and who you're collaborating with in those large organizations. So what is their role? What is their responsibility? What is their mandate? How close do they sit on strategy? How close do they sit on resources? And so you can align on that, because if you end up misaligning and talking to the wrong people and who may be promising something that they can't potentially deliver on at the end of the day, then that's where it can go wrong. So you need to have the confidence, if you like, to ask some fairly leading questions about who you're talking to and who you're collaborating with in a trustworthy, respectful manner, just like, not who are you and why am I talking to you, but just building those relationships and understanding how an organization is structured and who decides on what within that organization is really important, obviously.
The UIIN Conference 2026, where universities, industry, and innovators meet to shape the future. Join us in Stockholm for 3 days of insight, inspiration, and impact. Hear from global thought leaders, expand your network, and be part of the conversations driving collaboration forward. Secure your place now at uiin.org/conference.
Maybe we're now talking really about well-developed relationships. If we can take it back to that earlier stage when you're setting up a collaboration, especially in the context that you work in, global pharma, medtech, how do you approach balancing some of those institutional priorities, publication rights, academic freedom, with commercial goals around maybe IP protection, confidentiality? How do you usually balance that?
We get involved. A lot of the support so we manage a number of partnerships within the team, but we also, and this is important, is we provide hands-on support to our researchers who want to collaborate with an external industry partner. And in order to get that, I think what we strive to get involved early. So if a lot of our collaborations, I think they occur because our researchers are very much out there. So they're publishing and they're at conferences and they're presenting. So they get picked up. What they present in and is of interest to industry, and they'll be contacted and they'll follow up. And so when they come to us and say, I've been contacted by company X and they want to do something within this particular area, how can you support us? So to be involved early in that discussion, to understand what does the company want and what are the researchers willing to offer in a collaborative format and who gets what out of it. And then we can then take the discussion to another level as to, well, you comfortable with this in terms of your academic freedom? How do you see this collaboration in relation to everything you're doing within your research group? Would there be a potential conflict? Is it going to enrich your research? Is it going to be something that would create value for you within your research team? And if not, then, why would you want to do that? So I have these kind of discussions with our research leaders. And then after we talk about academic integrity and industry wanting to steer what they do, I never really view that as a problem. I always review it as something that I think is often blown out of all proportion, because I think if you get the discussion right from the beginning, you can manage that and you can align on what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And if somebody's uncomfortable, we're not forcing them to do it, but we're helping them make informed decisions about the benefit of doing that and helping them should they make that decision. And then we help them further along the way. When it comes to publication, apart from things that are very highly confidential, if you like, business critical for partners, then we insist on there should be no veto. There should be no restrictions on what we would publish or in terms of what we generate. So anything we generate in an industry partnership should be free to be able to use both for future research. We should be free to publish it, and we should be free to use it also for educational purposes. So a veto on publication is not something that we accept unless it's something that is very, very, very confidential, critical for the business. But we can cover that in contracting.
Yeah.
The other thing that's relevant here is that in Sweden, we have the Swedish professor's privilege, which you've probably heard about, which basically says that the ownership and exploitation of any IP generated from a Swedish university is owned by the person that generated that IP. So it's owned by our researchers. And that we need to manage and we need to work around. And that is probably one of the biggest challenges, I think, that we have when contracting with external organizations outside Sweden, is explaining who actually owns and who can exploit the IP that's generated.
Yeah.
In a partnership that we've negotiated at KI. Yeah, that's doable, but it's just largely an educational exercise in helping our collaborative partners understand how to work in that space with us.
Yeah. I guess also part of this type of role, right, being this translator sometimes in all kinds of ways.
I think that's a nice analogy, because I think a lot of what we do is actually based on translation. It's actually, so the other support we provide is early support when it comes to contracting and how you dock in with the lawyers. So we built up a translation facilities. So we have a number of people in my team that have worked long-term as researchers here at K, or that are used to working with industry, that are used to looking at contracts, but they're not lawyers. But they help the researchers understand what they need to consider in a contract. And then they also help the lawyers understand what the researchers want and what the collaborative partner wants, so that the lawyers have something concrete to make a risk assessment on and then judge things. And getting that kind of alignment and getting everything in place before the lawyers look and review a draft contract. And working in that space, I think, is really important. And I think it's also a measure of the success of how we've been able to link between legal input and the researchers' needs, if you like, and contracting with our external partners. And linked to that, we also actually spend a lot of time educating our external partners as to the fact that we're a Swedish public body, we're a university, we're not a healthcare provider, and how the rules of engagement, the rules of the game, if they want to collaborate with us, if you like.
Maybe to build on that a bit, because you touched at the beginning of this conversation around how you may not always be aware of what researchers are doing or who they're speaking with but you do have kind of this suite of services that you do provide to the researchers. Have you, in many universities, we sometimes hear that either the researchers don't necessarily come to this unit or to this front door, that internal front door, or to use these services, or sometimes they're maybe not aware of it. What's it like for you? Do you see researchers coming to you, or do you have to go and try to find out what they're doing? How do you stay on top of the
Yeah.
different types of
Yeah,
collaboration?
we support those that understand that we exist and that come to us. So we actually, but this is just across the board, is we're a central support function. So how do we get out there in a large organization and reach the researchers is something that we work on daily, is internal scouting or internal outreach and making people aware that we exist, the services we provide, and how the services we provide create value for them as researchers when they want to collaborate with external partners. But I would say we're getting better at it. And the more we create impact stories, the more we're out there, the more we're showcasing how we create value for the individual researchers as well as for the organization, the more people approach us. So and we want people to, particularly, I guess, when it comes to early contracting support, because we want people to do the right thing from the beginning to reduce risk, ensure compliance later on. And that involves creating that alignment with our external partners and making sure that what our researchers and what we as an organization agree to with our external partners is actually something that we can agree to from a legal and ethical compliance point of view. And so that's important, that we're there at the early stage, if you like, in providing support.
Is that the area where you see researchers need or ask for the most support with the contracting?
I would say that's one area where the researchers definitely need it, but they don't always ask for it because I think that because they often don't know that they need to ask for it. Right. So I think when we think about the support that we provide and we talk about impact case stories and storytelling and yada, yada, but I think we also need to work about educating and inspiring our researchers so they understand why they need to get the right format for a collaboration. They understand why contracting is important and it's not just a bureaucratic burden for them. It's actually something that's important for ensuring equality and compliance in what they want to do with their collaborative partners. Because it's super, super important, even though it sounds really, it's a lot of what we do is holding people's hands and taking our researchers outside of their comfort zones and making sure, helping them do the right thing.
Yeah, exactly. And it's often, especially I think with this kind of topic, you only see the importance of the value when something then maybe goes wrong or go as it should. Then you realize, oh yeah, we probably should have thought about this earlier on. Richard, we have only a few minutes left of our conversation. So I'd like to think a bit, we've touched quite a bit on your approach at Karolinska. We talked about some of the partnerships, what have been some success factors. Maybe we take it looking at your approach towards collaboration and partnerships, your approach at the External Engagement Office. What parts of your model, your approach have you seen be successful and could potentially be transferable, or some insights you might have to other institutions? And what are others where people should reconsider or before applying it, or really have to contextualize it before trying to apply it?
I think it's good. I mean, I was going back to KI's vision and KI's mission. It's good to start somewhere. I think it's important to create that alignment. So I mentioned when we were talking offline is that KI has a vision to advance knowledge about life and strive towards better health for all. It sounds very bombastic, if you like, but it provides you with the basis. It provides you with the basis to actually create alignment. Then you can have the discussion about, okay, what's your role? What's our role? And how can we work together to do something in this space? And if you get that alignment right, then hopefully everything else can fall into place. But if you end up misaligned in the beginning in terms of what you want to do and what your expectations are and what you're expected to contribute and get out of a partnership, then you're making life very difficult for yourself. Then you need to be open and transparent. I think one of the things in this space is a lot of people get hung up about talking and, oh, we need an NDA in place and we need to take everything. No, you don't. A lot of what you can do in this space, you can just talk and you can just reason around things, because then confidentiality comes later and then you can regulate all that thinking. But just to have the dialogue and have the open up and just be honest with each other as to what you're doing and what you want and create that alignment and common vision up front. I think it's a very generic advice to give, but I think, just don't get hung up about talking and being open.
Yeah, no, good point. And I mean, if you don't have those conversations, it's hard to then find the opportunities that would lead to the partnerships. Maybe final question. If I think a bit around the future, especially in how life sciences and medtech is evolving, maybe with AI, precision medicine, focus on societal impact, do you see any new challenges for universities or new types of partnerships emerging between universities and companies?
Yeah, whether you call them challenges or whether you call them opportunities, there are many opportunities. And this is what makes it both worthwhile and also fun working in this space. I think one of the challenges maybe is docking into the healthcare system because we're a medical university, but like I said, we're not a hospital, we're not a healthcare provider. And I think one of the challenges is then working in three-way partnerships with healthcare provision, industry, and the university. It's easier. Two-way partnerships are much easier. So that's probably what our biggest challenge. But we can take another webinar about the challenges of working in that space. But we're getting there, I would say. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Great. Then I'd love to keep asking you more questions, but I think you
Can we have a load of questions in the chat that we've not even opened? But anyway.
I apologize because I thought I would get a pop-up and I just noticed that there are questions in the chat. Are you happy to stay on a couple more minutes?
I can stay on because I told you 30 minutes was too short. Yeah.
So there was so apologies to the people who asked questions. I will address them now. How do you manage potential conflicts of interest, especially in areas like public health, where staff may be more sensitive to perceptions and reality of commercial influence agendas? We touched on that a little bit, maybe.
Yeah, I drifted into that at the end. And I think with public health, if you like healthcare provision, and I think this is historically, it bottoms out in the way big pharma has worked with the healthcare providers and healthcare provisions and doctors. And those relationships have been very transactional. And I think one of the mistakes, if you like, well, it's not a mistake, but it's the way that the pharma industry used to work with healthcare provision is we would place a study, we would with a ready protocol, and you do this for us and deliver that. But we're talking about much more collaborative models. We're talking about both parties provide some kind of intellectual input. They contribute to the study design, the running of the study, and the outcome and interpretation of what you've done in a collaborative project. And it's a different way of working. And I think it's easier for us to do that at the university, and it's more challenging to do that with the hospitals and the healthcare providers. So I think there's a lot of history there that needs to be readdressed, and I understand the reluctance amongst healthcare providers in working with industry but that needs to be addressed. And we can do that by coming in from our angle and helping address that reluctance.
I guess it's similar to a piece you mentioned earlier around also both sides, in a way, educating each other on, you were talking in the context of IP and professor's privilege, but there's always that role to play.
No, I think education is really important and educating people early, if you like. So we have actually education programs with industry, with our medical students. So we have this with AstraZeneca and our medical student organization. So they're working there and they're creating awareness as to why industry is important and why collaborating with industry is important, so that you break down some of the preconceptions, some of the misconceptions that some people have about working with industry in this space. So absolutely, education is important and inspiration, just breaking it down,
Yeah. And maybe last question that was in the chat, we talked a bit around how you said to start with the dialogue, and you can think about the confidentiality, the NDAs, the contracts later. There's a question around how early in the dialogue would you address IP, so background versus foreground, or kind of the IP that will be developed.
That depends on what you want to do. That depends on what you want to do in a collaboration. To be honest with you, many of the collaborations that we have with industry, IP is not the prime interest. The prime interest is not to commercialize something. The prime interest is to understand disease, get the information out there, get it used by clinicians, get it used by other people that are in that space. So it's what the publications have been used for, like I said, in changing clinical practice or changing policies, and IP becomes secondary. I think, having said that, IP is regulated in every contract, but it's not necessarily relevant for every collaboration that we're in.
Richard, thank you so much for a really interesting conversation. It's been great to hear more about your approach, but also just get some insights into what works well, what doesn't work well, and some of these elements of partnership that we should be thinking about.
Sure. And I mean, if there's any follow-up questions, I think you already advertised my availability via LinkedIn, so I'm happy just to continue the conversation, because I think it's also good for us.
Yeah, no, definitely. And as you said at the start of this conversation, having the opportunity to learn from others, to talk from others, we always have that through our events or through our roundtables that we run. So hopefully,
Yeah, I said we do it our way. People do it other ways, and we need to learn from others as well as from ourselves.
All right. Well, Richard, thank you again.
Thank you. I enjoyed that.
Thanks everyone who's joined us as well. I wish you a great rest of the day. Thank you for listening to today's discussion. Follow UIIN on LinkedIn. And if you're enjoying our podcast, make sure to subscribe, rate, and review in your podcast platform of choice to help other people find this content too.